In this section 1.5, I will begin at the point where it says using the rules to find the sum. The number line is great, but when you get to future classes, it's easier if you can use the rules. So that's where I'm going to focus my efforts. The rules say if you're adding numbers with the same sign, you're going to add and keep the sign. If you're adding numbers with different signs, you're going to subtract and take the sign of the larger. Our first example deals with whole numbers, so we'll start with those. In our first group, we have 4 plus -8 plus -2. You can group this problem however you wish. I'm actually going to choose to go ahead and add my negatives. What I notice about this group is that -8 and -2 have the same sign. So since they have the same sign, I'm going to add them and keep the sign. Bringing the 4 over, I would have the number 4. -8 plus -2 would give me a 10. Keeping the sign, it would give me a -10. Now then, I have a +4 and a -10. Those have different signs. Different signs tell me to subtract. That would give me 6. And take the sign of the larger. Since 10 is larger, my answer would be a -6. Looking at our second one, we have -10 plus -25. Those have the same sign. If they have the same sign, we're going to add them to get 35, and then we're going to keep the sign, which is negative. So my answer for this one is -35. Our next problem says 5 minus 9. It doesn't matter if you call that symbol a minus, if you call it a subtraction, if you call it a negative. They all mean the same thing. And that's a takeaway. They all mean to take away. So if you look at this one, you have a +5. That negative sign, whatever you call it, is opposite than a positive. So these have different signs. So you're going to subtract and get 4. Taking the sign of the larger, since the 9 has a negative sign, we are going to have a -4. The last one on this slide, you have the same sign. Same sign tells you to add, and that would give us 17, and keep the sign, so that would be a -17. These were all whole numbers. Next, we'll look at decimals. Decimals are a little tougher. Your sign rules still hold though. So if they have the same sign, you're going to add. If they have different signs, you're going to subtract. My first problem says -8.21 plus 4.06. They have different signs. Different signs tell you to subtract. When you subtract decimals, you take your bigger number first. So my bigger number is 8.21. To subtract the decimals, the 4.06 would go beneath it, but make sure you line up your decimal places. At this point, we're going to have to borrow. Because we are going to be subtracting, since the 8 was negative, we need to borrow. 6 can't go from 1, so we borrow. We borrow and make that an 11, which means we had to borrow from the 2 to make it a 1. So 11 minus 6 would give me 5. 1 minus 0 would give me 1. And 8 minus 4 would give me 4. At this point, though, we need to choose our sign. Since 8 was negative, our answer will also be negative. So my answer was -4.15. Moving across to the next one, we have -10.01 plus 5.263. We have different signs, so we're going to subtract. So I have -10.01, and that's going to go on the top because 10 is a larger number than 5. When I get ready to write my second number. Remember, I have to line up the decimals, so I line them up directly under the 10. That means the 3 is hanging out there by itself. So I need to put a 0 in there to hold its place. We have different signs, so we're going to subtract, and that means we have to borrow. Borrowing here is really, really tricky. So I can't subtract 3 from 0, so that means I have to borrow. When I borrow 1, that makes a 10. That also makes a 0 in the next column. So 10 minus 3 would give me 7. Okay, moving to the next one, I can't subtract 6 from 0, which means I have to borrow. I know that number is 10.0, but when we're borrowing, kind of think of it like instead of 10.0, think of it as 100, and 100 would be 100. So the easiest way to borrow is I need to borrow 1 to make this 0 a 10, and if I borrow 1 from 100, 100 minus 1 would give me 99. And that's a lot easier to borrow from than borrowing one column at a time with all those zeros. So 10 minus 6 would give me 4. 9 minus 2 would give me 7. 9 minus 5 would give me 4. Remember, my larger number was negative, so that's going to give me a negative 4.747. And that's my answer. The last one on this slide gives you a negative 3.426 plus negative 6.2. These have the same sign. The same sign tells you to add and keep the sign. When you're adding, it does not matter which one you put on top. I always prefer to put my larger one on top, so I'm still going to start with 6.2 in the top. Remember to line up your decimals. 3.426 lines up so that the 2 and the 6 are hanging off the back. I'm going to fill in the gaps with zeros. And remember, since they are both negative, we're going to add and keep the sign. So adding them up, 6 plus 0 is 6, 2 plus 0 is 2, 4 plus 2 is 6, 6 plus 3 is 9, and we would get a negative 9.626. This was adding and subtracting decimals. You do have fractions in this section, but to keep my video size small, I made a separate video for fractions. So go back to your lesson and you can find a separate video for fractions. So far we've added whole numbers, we've added decimals, and now we're going to add variable terms. When you add variable terms, remember they have to be alike. In this first one, I have a 5x plus negative 7y plus negative 2x plus negative 8y. I'm going to add the x's together. So 5x plus negative 2x would give me 3x. Looking at my y group, I have a negative 7y and a negative 8y. Those have the same sign, so I'm going to add and keep the sign. 7 plus 8 gives me 15. Since they're both negative, my answer will be negative. My final answer for this problem is 3x minus 15y. Our last problem is a distributing one. We have 10 times parentheses 2x minus 3 plus 4 times parentheses 5x minus 1. I'm going to start by distributing the 10 through its set. So 10 times 2x, that would give me 20x. And 10 times minus 3 would give me minus 30. I'm going to multiply the 4 through its set. 4 times 5x would give me 20x, and 4 times negative 1 would give me negative 4. At this point, we have to add our like terms. 20x plus 20x is 40x, and negative 30 and a negative 4 have the same sign, so we're going to add those and get 34, and we're going to keep that sign, which is negative. My final answer is 40x minus 34.